Hello, everyone, and welcome to the October 2019 SGSO-Network webinar, all about winter programming and northern climates. My name is Tristana Perkle, and I am with the Whole Kids Foundation. Whole Kids Foundation helps to host these webinars, but each month we are able to feature and work with school garden support organizations all over the country to bring you amazing programming. So today we're diving into everything all about winter programming. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We have a really great lineup for you today. We want to leave plenty of time for questions. So if you go into the next slide, please. Our agenda, not our agenda, just some housekeeping items. There is going to be a recording of the webinar, so if you have to jump off early, that's cool, or if someone you know would like to hear this information, there will be a copy on our website, and it will also be emailed to you and to anyone who wasn't able to attend. We have a couple of handouts in the handout section if you are on your computer. The handout section of the control panel, there's 2 handouts there that are great resources for you. We would love to hear your questions, and we'll definitely be leaving plenty of time for questions at the end. So please check out the questions section of your control panel and type those in as they come up, and we will be collecting questions at the end and answering them. And then finally, we'd love to know what you thought of the webinar. So there is a survey that popped up right at the end of the webinar, and it's also in the follow-up email where the recording will be shared. So if you go into the next slide, we'll give you a little bit of an overview of the School Garden Support Organization-Network. Essentially, we are a group of school garden support professionals, individuals from organizations that support multiple school gardens. Originally got together at the 2012 Farm to Cafeteria Conference, and our goal is all about creating dialogue amongst SGSOs, creating best practices and allowing for networking and sharing, so that even though we might be the only SGSO in our community, at least we're not reinventing the wheel, and we can support each other across the country and beyond. So we do that in 3 main ways. Our first way is through our Google forum, or our kind of just way of connecting with each other online. So we've got this Google forum, which you can get to via our network, sgsonetwork.org, and you can also just email. Once you're on the forum, you can just send it out to a Google email, and you just be a part of that, and it's just a really great source of information. We also have our webinar series, which you are listening to. Next slide, please. That allows us to share information. Check out our next webinars in November. We're doing engaging and maintaining volunteers, and then in December we're doing instructional models. And then we do have we're working on a big slate of topics for 2020. And then finally, we also organize in-person gatherings. So if you go to the next slide, we've got some coming up in 2020. We've got the SGSO Leadership Institute in January. That's an application process that is closed now, but stay tuned for the following year to join for that. And then I'm sure we'll be gathering at lots of different conferences next year, but definitely the Farm to Cafeteria Conference in April. So stay tuned for more details on those. And then next, I believe we will be doing some polls to kind of get a sense of who's in the room. So you'll see a little box pop up on your screen. Just let us know, what role do you play in the garden? Maybe you're a teacher at the school, maybe you're an administrator, maybe you're just not just, of course, but maybe you're a garden educator, but not necessarily a classroom educator. Or maybe you are a staff at a school garden support organization. Maybe you're something else that doesn't quite fall into any of those boxes. It's just really lovely for us to get a sense of who's in the room. We'll give you a couple more seconds. Great. So it looks like the majority of you all are garden educators. We also have a little bit of everyone else. Awesome. And then we're also going to ask you, what do you currently do for student programming in the winter? We'd love to know where are you currently standing? Maybe you don't do anything. Maybe you do some cooking. Maybe you do some hydroponics that can be indoors. Maybe you do grow lights, growing with soil indoors, or maybe, you know, something else. Awesome. So it looks like mainly other, majority other. Okay, cool. No one's doing hydroponics. We got a little bit of nothing, a little bit of cooking. So we're excited to share some more options and opportunities for how you can do winter programming. So now I'm going to hand it off to Christine.
Awesome, thank you. Hi folks, my name is Christine Gall, and I'll be introducing myself in more depth shortly, but I just wanted to say that myself, Erin, and Stefanie are very excited to be sharing a bit about our programs with you today and discussing kind of what we do throughout the winter. Can we have the next slide, please? So in this webinar, we'll be talking about what programming SGSOs can do throughout this long winter time. First, we'll be focusing on in-class connections and creative ways to keep students engaged in programming while your garden is dormant. And then we'll transition to a discussion about how your organization can focus on making some external connections by thinking about things like advocacy, trainings, and networking. And then we'll be sure to leave some time at the end of the webinar so that folks can ask questions, and we will do our best to answer them for you. Can we have the next slide, please? Great, so without further ado, we are going to jump right into talking a little bit about classroom connections. Next slide, please. So as I said, my name is Christine Gall. I am the Garden Education Coordinator for the Burlington School District. This means that I manage school gardens, I support teachers to integrate food-based learning into their everyday teaching practice, and I also facilitate gardening and cooking classes, predominantly at the elementary school level. I specifically work for our district's food service department, which is called the Burlington School Food Project. You can feel free to check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and or Facebook to see what we're whipping up in the kitchens and to get a feel for our educational programming, some aspects of which I'm about to talk about in more depth. Can we have the next slide, please? So during the growing season, many of our schools maintain productive gardens, and the students have the opportunity to visit these gardens with their teachers or during classes with me. But due to our location in northern Vermont, much of our school year is actually pretty chilly, so we work to institute cooking classes as an extension of our educational garden programming. So our cooking program is based on a series of mobile kitchen carts. And this programming got started a couple years ago when one of our schools purchased something called a Charlie cart. It's a custom-made kitchen on wheels, and it's manufactured by a company out in California. It is a fantastically comprehensive resource, and it has pretty much everything you need to lead a cooking activity for a large group of students. So for example, there are 15 or so cutting boards, there are 15 sets of silverware and rolling pins. There are multiple sets of measuring cups and measuring spoons, various side mixing bowls and serving bowls, induction burners, convection oven, electric griddle, even a Vitamix. It's a really fantastic resource, but it is also quite expensive. I believe it was about $10,000, and an acquisition of that cost is not realistic for many schools. But this school had a particularly invested PTO that was willing to support this, and they had a handful of parents who made some major donations and successfully applied to some substantial grants. So the school had a lot going for them that enabled them to buy this Charlie cart. But other schools in the district, they saw this resource and they heard about the cooking classes we were doing with it. And we just got a huge wave of requests to help replicate this programming, but with a much lower budget in mind. So I worked with these schools and we created a series of mobile kitchen carts using old salad bars that we had salvaged from a district storage facility. We had one teacher who was a fantastic carpenter, and on his own time, he installed some shelving in the salad bars and some sliding countertop surfaces. And then we were able to get some donations from our PTOs and funding from both the curriculum and food service departments, who recognized the educational value of cooking activities based on observations of cooking classes with the Charlie cart. And so we went from one school's kind of unique vision and a singular impressive fundraising effort to a district-wide program that receives funding from 2 departments. And you know, these old salad bars that we retrofitted, they have everything that the Charlie cart, that really expensive resource, does. They work just as well, but for a fraction of the cost. And while you may not have an old salad bar floating around, you know, you can just as easily start a cooking programming without a mobile kitchen cart. You know, a cart is fun to have. It can make it easy to transport equipment around your school. But if you're really interested in starting your own program on a budget, your initial focus can just be on getting an assortment of basic kitchen equipment. And to help you think about that, if it's of interest, I've included a PDF inventory of everything that we have on the Charlie cart. We use this list to outfit our homemade cooking carts. So it's everything that we have, everything that we use. So if you check out the handout tab on your control panel, you can feel free to download it there. Can we go to the next slide, please? Great. So our cooking activities, they happen right in the classroom, and they're really the result of a collaborative planning effort with each of our schools' garden or outdoor learning committee. So each month I work with these committees and we pick a single recipe and we create some sort of Google document that we can share with all the teachers. This document will include information on the recipe and a series of educational resources about the type of produce we might be highlighting. That way teachers can send these handouts home so that parents know what's going on, but they can also use these educational resources to pre-teach a cooking activity or to follow up a cooking activity. This Google Doc, perhaps most importantly, it includes a schedule of class times that I'm available, and teachers opt into these. So these are generally hour-long spots on a pre-selected day, and they're always consistent. So for example, I'm always at Flynn Elementary School on Tuesdays, and we always offer 4 cooking classes at the same time each week. Other than these cooking classes with me, teachers are also encouraged to do activities independently. And this is where a shared understanding of how to facilitate cooking classes can become really important. So at the start of each year, I'll attend a staff meeting and we'll go over a series of standard operating procedures for cooking with students. This includes talking about designated age-appropriate tools. For example, when it comes to cutting implements, our 4th and 5th graders will use real paring knives that are quite sharp. Our 2nd and 3rd graders, on the other hand, will use these nylon safe knives. And our younger students, they may only use a pan scraper or a crinkle cutter. And these SOPs essentially ensure that we're tackling cooking projects the same way and that we're establishing a safety baseline. And that goes beyond how we're introducing or using kitchen utensils and equipment with students, but also how we're approaching keeping kids with food sensitivities or allergies safe. So our standard operating procedures document is also available on your control panel in the handouts tab. You can feel free to download that just to see how we're thinking about safety and making sure that everyone is approaching safety in the same way. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right. So when it comes to our educational goals for cooking in the classroom, we really actually have a minimal emphasis on nutrition. Instead, we're largely focusing on culinary skills and life skills. And when I say life skills, I mean being able to seriously think about your food choices. So whenever students try something, I always ask them to think about the ingredients we included in the recipe and to have them pinpoint what they can taste to really identify those flavors. And then we'll go a step further and I'll ask them to think about how they might change the recipe if they were to make it again on their own. And if they were to make it in such a way that they might like it even more. So if they like the sourness of something and they want more of that, they can add more lemon next time. Or if they use something, if they thought something was too spicy, then they know they can take out the scallions or the garlic that we use. Basically, we're using our cooking classes and tasting activities as a platform for discussing food preferences and to empower students to feel like they have agency over their food choices. And it's also a space for students to practice stepping outside their comfort zone and beginning to feel comfortable trying new things. And this is something that I remind them pretty much every single time we get together, that it can be scary to try new things, but that, this is a space where we can feel safe and that we can try something and it's okay if we really like it, but it's equally okay if we don't like it. Can we go to the next slide, please? So beyond those educational objectives, we're also really thinking about cultural relevance. Our school district has a really diverse student population, both ethnically and socioeconomically. And I always try and keep this in mind at all times when we're cooking. So that means we're picking recipes that are feasible for families to replicate at home if they so choose. We're making sure nothing is too expensive. And we're talking about the ways to shop for recipe ingredients on a budget. We're also making space to do recipes that are culturally relevant to our new American student populations. So we're making spring rolls, stir-fry dishes, chap pate, which is a classic example of a Nepali street food dish. We actually had a few young women work together to compare the ways their individual families were making chap pate, and then they created a single aggregated recipe, which we cooked up in class with their help. And the picture on the slide you see is actually from that class. So Stuti and Bindi, who are the two students at the cooking cart, they worked with me to teach the class and to facilitate this activity. And it was really, really neat to see them stepping up and educating their peers and sharing a bit about their home and their own culture. On a similar note, we've also done recipes that pay homage to the Native American tribes that have lived in Vermont for centuries. So this month, in fact, we are making a traditional Abenaki soup at one of our schools, and we're tying this cooking class to a number of other activities that are taking place all month in an effort to acknowledge that Vermont is officially recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day this year instead of Columbus Day. And doing these recipes that are representative of our diverse student body and representative of Indigenous populations, I think, are really important. I think that they're vital opportunities to not only get kids trying new things and expanding their horizons, but they're also springboards for discussions about diversity and equity and representation. And so that is a snapshot of the winter programming that we are doing in the Burlington School Food Project. When it's the growing season, we're doing a lot of tasting in our gardens. So cooking seems like a natural growth. And it's been a really, really fun development. And I hope that this was helpful. And, you could think about some things that you might be able to replicate in your spaces. But up next, Erin is going to share a little bit about what she does in Montana.
Thank you. So my name is Erin Jackson. I'm the Education Director with Gallatin Valley Farm to School. We're a Bozeman, Montana-based organization that connects children to where food comes from through hands-on agriculture, garden, science, and food education, garden-based summer camps, teacher training, cafeteria, local food procurement, and community capacity building for local producers. So living here in Montana, we have about a 90-day growing season. This year it frosted the last week of September, and that was a long season for us compared to most years. So as you can imagine, this presents many challenges for garden-based education, as the majority of the growing season takes place when school is not in session. Despite the cold temperatures in dormant gardens, though, we find many ways to keep kids engaged in learning about where food comes from, and I'm excited to share some of our programs with you today. So once the snow flies and gardens are put to bed, we transition from garden education to classroom education that's focused on cooking, local food, and science. So our winter programs aim to increase knowledge for children of where food comes from, seasonality, and local agriculture, improve attitudes, so try to get them to try new foods and like healthy foods. And then we're also empowering students with the skills they need to prepare healthy snacks and to make healthy choices for their bodies, communities, and for the environment. Next slide, please. Our winter education programs follow the Harvest of the Month schedule. You may have heard of Harvest of the Month before. It's a program that focuses on one food grown locally each month, and it provides recipes, classroom activities, and resources. Many states have some sort of Harvest of the Month program, so I encourage you to look up your state's program or follow these links to the Vermont, Illinois, or Montana programs. Harvest of the Month activities are a great way to extend garden-based education because they teach children about foods that maybe aren't grown in school gardens and foods that can be stored and available even after the growing season is over. I'm going to share with you some of the ways that we use local food in the classroom during our Harvest of the Month lessons. Next slide, please. So as Christine talked about, we do a ton of cooking with our students over the winter. And our cooking lessons and the recipes we choose generally follow the Harvest of the Month schedule. So we're choosing things that are available from our local farmers and producers. And these lessons, similarly to Christine's, are teaching children how to make informed choices about food and then giving them the skills so that they can prepare healthy foods for themselves. Harvest of the Month in Montana for October is apples. So this month we're making applesauce and an apple, cabbage, and carrot slaw. I also put down some of our other favorites, which are just any kind of raw salad where children can be peeling and grating and cutting up herbs and those sorts of things, as well as dips, so hummus dips and other bean dips that children can dip vegetables into. There are a ton of great recipes on the Harvest of the Month pages linked in the previous slide, so I encourage you to go through those and pick out some that you might want to try. And with all of these Harvest of the Month classes, we'll send home the recipe so that the families are encouraged to make the recipe at home. Next slide, please. So while we all know that the garden is one of the best places to learn about where food comes from, building food literacy also requires a more in-depth look at the systems involved in getting food to our plate. The winter is a great time to help students understand our food system, and I'm going to talk about just a few activities that we do. So one idea is to compare the steps of your Harvest of the Month item, or any food item you can get locally, and compare it to a local and a non-local food item. So for example, you could take a local carrot and a bag of baby carrots and have the students think about the food miles, the packaging, the resources put into growing those foods, and the environmental impact. And have the students compare how the paths of those foods are similar and how they're different. You can also have students trace their favorite food back to the source. So if their favorite food is pizza, have them break apart pizza and figure out where did the dough come from, what's it made out of, and the tomato sauce, and any toppings on the pizza. And have students trace each ingredient from the farm to their plate, and again, looking up the miles that the food traveled, the time it was spent growing, the costs of that food getting to their plate. And this really helps connect kids on a larger level to all the steps, people, and processes involved in getting food to them on a regular basis. For October, we have our students create a pretend farmers market and have them sell apples to their classmates. So they have to research the different local varieties of apples. They have to make signage for them, provide taste tests to promote these apples, and then the children buying them get to practice sampling and counting out their money to purchase the apples from their classmates. Next slide. So this food advertisement can also tie into the language arts classroom. So even if you're not doing a whole farmer's market, we do an activity where students make food advertisements for either the Harvest of the Month crop or their favorite fruit or vegetables or foods from the school garden. And the children can do research, learn about the nutrition of the foods, how it was grown, where it was grown, what the names mean, and then have them post these posters around the schools to encourage their peers to eat more of the fruits and vegetables. There are plenty of other ways to integrate food into the science and language art classrooms as well. I listed a few ideas here. So we provide students with our local vegetables. You can see the Harvest of the Month was winter squash, and we have students practice doing detailed scientific diagrams and labeling and really using all of their senses. We also have students sort their garden foods by the plant part we eat, such as the roots, the leaves, the stems, or even do art with the plants. So on the right, you can see students painting with beet paint made out of the beetroot and labeling the parts and functions of the beet plant. We also have students open up winter squashes, practice counting seeds, and then this also ties into the life cycle and helps students understand how these plants reproduce. And we like to have students do mindful tasting activities to get them to actually slow down and enjoy and actually taste what they're eating. So you can have your students close their eyes and use each of their 5 senses to describe the food you're tasting in details. And you can even do a couple different varieties for comparison. Next slide, please. The winter is also a great time to invite farmers and ranchers and gardeners into your school because things have slowed down for them a bit. So every spring, we're lucky enough to live in an agricultural area, so every spring we have a local rancher bring her cows to the schools, and the cows will stand out on the playground all day long, and the rancher will teach the students all about regenerative beef and dairy production, both of which are harvest of the month items. And this is the closest a lot of these Montana kids have ever been to cows, so it's a really neat opportunity. Even if you don't have ranches in the area, talk to your local vegetable farmers. Have them come in and talk to the children about growing vegetables and seasonality, maybe beekeepers, or even if you live in an urban area, having a chef come into the classroom to lead a cooking lesson or taste test can be a great way to connect kids to the source of their food and the people in their community providing food. Next slide, please. So for winter, if in the winter, it can be more challenging to find local food, but it's not impossible. And so we encourage all of our educators in our schools to try to procure local food as much as possible for their lessons. So if you don't already know your producers, I encourage you to do some research and find the growers in your state. You can call around or email them and join their produce availability list so you can see what's available on a weekly basis and what's in season throughout the year. Sometimes price can be a barrier for schools, so we find that we can keep the prices down when we order in bulk. So if you have multiple schools in your area participating in Harvest of the Month or cooking lessons, see if you can get together and order a case of apples or a case of carrot or bag of carrots together and then divide up the order to make it more cost effective for you. Winter lessons take a little bit more planning. So rather than focusing on a lesson about tomatoes in the middle of winter, try to base your lessons off of what types of fruits and vegetables are available in your area. In the winter, we do a lot of lessons with grains, legumes, and root vegetables because that's most of what's available for us to use. And then if the price is a barrier still, you can ask your parent committees to donate funds, and often grocery stores will provide a gift card for purchasing food for your classroom cooking classes and taste tests. Next slide, please. So aside from Harvest of the Month, another great way to keep kids excited about garden-based learning in the winter is to engage them in the process of planning their gardens for the upcoming season. Usually in late February or early March, we begin these lessons because we find that when students are part of the process from the beginning, they'll be much more engaged when the garden season rolls around. So with younger students, we bring in seed packets of crops that can be grown in our area. We have students look through the seed packets and choose a few crops that they want to grow in their dream garden and then draw it. With 4th and 5th graders, we have them choose a crop to research, and then we compile all the information from all of the classmates and use that to plan the garden. We challenge these older students to draw their gardens to scale and to actually plant or draw the number of plants per square foot based on the actual seed spacing guidelines of those plants. At the end of these lessons, we vote on which crops were most popular and then use these votes to inform the gardens we plant in the school garden because we actually have limited space and can't do every crop. And the students can also help in the seed ordering process once they've chosen the crop. Next slide, please. So once you have decided what to plant, it's a lot of fun to have children plant starts to care for under the grow lights. Having plants growing in the classroom gives children a daily connection to the growth of their plants and the source of their food. And it makes it much more fun when it is warm enough to plant outside to actually transplant the plants they've started from seed. So to determine when to plant starts, work backwards from your frost-free date in your area and look at the days to maturity or the days to maturity on the seed packet as well. Greenhouses can also extend the season by allowing us to plant earlier and continue growing into November. Because we have such a short growing season here in Montana, more and more schools are starting to write grants to build greenhouses. There are many grants that can get you started on your way to build a greenhouse, such as through the Whole Kids Foundation, the Annie's Grants for Gardens, and KidsGardening. So I encourage you to look up those garden grants if you're interested in a greenhouse. We find that greenhouses not only provide taste tests, so veggies to taste test throughout the shoulder season, but they also provide a living lab space for science experiments. Our organization helps support the planting, watering, and maintenance of the school greenhouses, and we found that engaging the after-school programs in greenhouse growing is a great way to ensure kids are interacting with them on a weekly basis. One of the biggest challenges of both greenhouses and classroom grow lights is keeping the plants watered. So if you are building a greenhouse, I recommend installing a frost-free drip system when you build it, if possible. And if not, ensure that you have people, ideally children, scheduled to water both the greenhouse and the plants under the grow lights every day or every few days in the cooler months. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Christine to explain the neat partnership their schools have for growing starts.
Great, thanks so much, Erin. So as I mentioned in my section above, we predominantly focus on cooking throughout the winter, but we do squeeze in some plantings here and there. At the elementary school level, we might take a break from our cooking classes to seed a couple growing flats and put them under grow lights. These seedlings usually become kind of resources for fundraising efforts. So we'll do all these big seedling sales right as the weather is starting to turn, and it's a great way for a school to do fundraising for both cooking programming or garden programming. When it comes to seedlings that will actually go into our school gardens, we generally rely on our high school students. So at Burlington High School, there's a food science class that does a lot of really fantastic cooking projects throughout the wintertime, but then they also help out with some of the gardens on their school campus. And one of their tasks is to work with me to plant seedlings for every single elementary school in the district. So we provide a document to each of the elementary school garden committees and ask them to look through it, and they can essentially select different varieties of plants that they might want. And we kind of pre-select a list based on what we think we can grow in a greenhouse. So schools will make their selections, they'll share that with me, and then I will work with the high school students to plant usually 800 to 1,000 seedlings in our greenhouse at the high school. We'll then distribute these to classes, and once it gets warm enough, we'll completely stop our cooking and we'll transition out to the garden space, and we'll take all these seedlings that our high schoolers grew and we'll put them in the ground. So that's kind of how we integrate a little bit of growing into our dormant season. This typically happens late spring. We'll do some planting, go back to cooking, and then revisit the garden space once we get into, late April or mid-May. So those are all the different ways that myself and Erin can connect gardening programming to the indoors over the course of the winter. And now we're going to move on to thinking about how organizations can be making connections beyond the classroom. And we're going to have Stefanie take it away from here.
Thanks, Christine. My name is Stefanie, and I'm with the Wisconsin School Garden Network. We are a project of Community Groundworks, which is a support organization located in a school garden support organization located in Madison, Wisconsin. You can feel free to check out all of our social media links as well. We like to share resources on our Facebook page, as well as Twitter with any up-to-date information. Next slide. So Community Groundworks, so like I said, the Wisconsin School Garden Network is a project of Community Groundworks, but we are also our partners at the Environmental Design Lab. We are funded by the Wisconsin Partnership Program from the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health. Next slide. So the vision of and the mission of the Wisconsin School Garden Network is to improve the health of children and well-being by supporting and promoting best practices in garden-based education. Basically, this means, we are a network of schools, early care education sites, after-school programming, and other school garden support organizations around the state at the regional and local level, connecting everybody together to work on to improve school garden education and supporting those with resources. We do webinars and just basically creating connections between educators to continue this work around the state. Next slide. So with that vision and mission in mind, what we do in the winter is there's a huge emphasis on our resources. We like to update our resources. This is a picture of our homepage, and you can see the resources tab up there. But basically, we work really hard to update our resources in the winter. We also do webinars in the winter, such as this one, and those can be found on our resource library as well. Another main thing that we do is we go around to different conferences in the state, regional conferences as well as local conferences statewide. Maybe they're more education-based. There's connections to environmental education as well, and that allows us to really share about the network and share those different resources to different educators. It allows us to build those relationships around the state, while not during the busy months of the spring while everybody's planning for the garden, or the summer while, people are on vacation or maybe help, maintain those garden spaces. And then in the fall, there's a huge emphasis on harvesting. And so in the winter, these are wonderful times for us to get together at different conferences, connect with folks, and see how we can continue to support each other's work and talk about the challenges and the successes that we've been having. Next slide. Another huge piece of the work that we do in the winter is updating our school garden map. So this is a map of all of the school gardens or ECE gardens in the state of Wisconsin. When we first started this project, there were, back in 2016, there were only 200 gardens on the map, but now there are over 600 gardens on the map. And so through the winter months, we work to connect with different educators and connect with different schools and early care sites to find out about these gardens and then put them on our map. The goal of this map is to create connections across those different elementary schools and high schools and make sure that people are communicating with one another about what they're doing in their schools to then better, to solve these problems together maybe that they're having, or create share success stories as well. Another huge piece of this is, you can notice from our map that we have kind of 5 different regions. And so we do a regional network gathering. We have 5 regional coordinators that are located across the state that are working to create local hubs. And so in the winter, that's a great time. Again, it's one of those great times to connect everybody together, to share what's happening in their regions, share those challenges, share those successes, create those connections, and continuing to grow the network and to find out about different organizations and different school gardens that are happening in the state. Next slide. So one story that we like to tell is about another piece of work that we do is around advocacy. And so with the experience that we've collected and seeing firsthand the impact that youth gardens have on children and improving their health and their wellness, like Christine and Erin talked about with just trying new foods and what that can do to a child's food preferences, we created these 2 briefs to talk about incorporating school gardens into school district wellness policies, and how adding that piece could really help to advocate for school gardens. across the state. And so we created these 2 briefs, and then we took it to the next level when there was an opportunity. You can go to the next slide. There was an opportunity with a piece of legislation that was passed called the Final Rule, with the USDA regulation that said that all school districts must update their school wellness policies in the 2017-2018 school year. And so we went through and we analyzed all of the school districts in the state of Wisconsin. We analyzed their wellness policies and found out that many of them had not yet updated for this final rule. And as such, we would then help and educate, maybe give some advice on things that they could add to their wellness policies to include school garden language. And so if you go to the next slide, there's a little graph that just kind of shows that, we were able to we discovered that 92 school districts hadn't yet updated their wellness policies, and they had no school garden language incorporated into those wellness policies. And so what we did is we tried to call as many as we could in that period of time, and we're able to call 44 different school districts in the area. And after we ended up calling, we were able to kind of gather this data. If we go to the next slide, and we could see that we were actually able to make an impact. And so we were able to, in looking at the different districts, of the districts that we called versus the districts that we did not call, 52% of the districts we contacted updated their wellness policies. And of the districts that we did not contact, 25% of those folks did not. So whether or not, this doesn't mean that they necessarily updated them with school garden language, but in general, they were able, our call, we think, inferring from the data, was able to spur them to have a conversation about what is a wellness policy, what does this mean for our school, and maybe it's time for us to update that. And so diving in deeper into the data, we were able to see, if we go to the next slide, that actually we were able to impact positively these wellness policies, and they actually, 61% of the districts that we called added this school garden language, general garden language, into their wellness policies, versus the 33% of the schools that we didn't call, only 33% of them added garden language. And then if we dive deeper, we notice that there's specific garden language in 22% of the schools that we call, versus none of the schools, so of the schools that we didn't call, none of them added specific school garden language into their wellness policies. And so I like to share this story because I think it really is a really great example of how, phone calling and just kind of network building and connecting to these different administrators and principals and school board districts was able to have an impact. And we can see that in the data here, that a number of schools were able to update their wellness policies and add in that school garden language into their policies, and hoping that will help influence decisions that are made down the road when it comes to their school garden and it comes to their school's wellness and well-being and their students' overall health and happiness. Next slide. So the last thing I want to kind of leave everybody with in terms of what we do at the Wisconsin School Garden Network over the winter is last year we had a first successful Wisconsin School Garden Day. We hosted it on May 23rd, 2019, and this next year, we will host another. In 2020, we'll host another Wisconsin School Garden Day in May. But the prepping for that really will begin. It's already starting to begin. We're starting to have preliminary conversations about what does that look like, and we'll really start to ramp up the marketing, starting in January. And so the winter will be a lot of planning towards that day, getting the word out. What are different activities that folks can be doing on Wisconsin School Garden Day? Another big piece of it was we had different representatives from around the state, the legislators, visit their school gardens to build that advocacy and to create that connection between those representatives and their districts. And so this was a great connection that we were able to make, and we're hoping that this next Wisconsin School Garden Day, with enough planning, in the future, we can get, maybe the governor will visit a school garden, or the deputy governor. And so we're able to kind of build that advocacy and show that support through our representatives for the work that we're doing with school gardens. And we thought that this appointment is a great way to show that support. And so it's another activity that folks can be thinking about in their states of, having a school garden day, and maybe the winter can be an excellent time to plan for those activities. Next slide. So I will turn it over to Tristana to facilitate some questions that we may have around the different activities that we all do during the winter.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you all for such great kind of innovative, fun ideas and ways specifically that you work in the winter. It's fantastic. So we've got a couple questions, but if more come up, please do go ahead and type them into the question section on your control panel. So we'll go ahead and get started. Christine, I believe this one is for you. How do you transport the Charlie carts, the kind of mobile cooking carts?
Yeah, sure thing. So as we've been developing cooking programming across the district, each school has created its own cooking cart. So we're essentially taking these resources and replicating them. Within the school itself, the Charlie cart and all of our cooking carts are on wheels, so they're really, really easy to just move around in between classes. We're fortunate that our schools that are 2 levels all have elevators that are functioning, so it's super easy to get it from level 1 to level 2. In terms of where they're stored, it depends on the school. We have one school that allows storage in the hallways, so we keep it covered right in the hallway. In another school, it's in a storage closet. In another school, the cooking cart is in someone's office, and in another school, it's in a teacher's lounge. So I think that if you were interested in creating some sort of singular resource that could be transported in between schools, that perhaps a cooking cart might not be the best way to go since they can be pretty large. But it's simple enough just to purchase all of your assorted cooking materials and to transport them in large kind of plastic Tupperware containers. I've even seen folks put them in little wheeled carts, kind of like little wagons, which are much more mobile, and you can kind of get them from point A to point B on wheels, but then you can also just pick it up and easily put it in your car.
Awesome, thank you. Erin, I believe this one's for you. I think you mentioned doing food systems education indoors with your students. What resources do you provide to help students research food sources?
That's a great question. So it kind of depends on which lesson we are doing. But generally, we will get all of the sourcing information for whatever foods we're bringing into the classroom. And we'll sometimes put it in just a document that students can read over. If you go to the Harvest of the Month link for Montana, we have documents for each of our fruits and vegetables that we feature. And so that has lots of information about the nutrition, how the foods are grown, and that's a page we'll just give to students and have them kind of close read and pull information out of. Otherwise, we'll just have students do a general search online. I don't have any specific resources that we go to. We just have students, research the growing season of these foods and the place they are most often grown, and just do more of a broad Google search.
Awesome, thank you. And for all of you that do work with grow lights, how do you deal with water runoff and just kind of cleanliness inside?
This is Erin. That can certainly be a challenge, but we make sure that we buy, when you get the cells for planting, make sure you buy a tray, one of the black trays that does not have any holes in it. And so we'll usually just put the cells in that black tray, and then we'll often put a layer of towels down under those trays to kind of catch any water that seeps off. But most of the water is contained within the black tray under the tray of cells where the plants are actually planted. And that's the nice thing about the grow lights we have kind of two systems. One is that we get the independent grow lights and just kind of put it near the window and put the planting tray right under it. There are also some grow lights that are built as they're kind of stacked, and they have hanging grow lights, and then they have trays underneath the grow lights, and so they have a few grow lights stacked vertically, and then all of the plants can be contained on those, and you can just sweep up any soil that falls off from under those. And
I would like
using
to.
Sorry, I was just going to add, using a watering can that only gives out a little bit of water. So rather than when you kind of just dump out of a pitcher or something, the soil and water might splash out, but using a watering can that has smaller drops can also help with that. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to second what Erin said about getting the individual trays to hold your growing flat. Not only does it catch water, but actually if you have a long weekend, you can pour some water in that tray, and over the course of the weekend, the individual cells will gradually suck up that water so it can keep your seedlings watered kind of over a 2-day span where you might not be in your classroom. And that can be really important since seedlings really thrive on having enough moisture.
Fantastic. Such good resources. Thank you. Stefanie, you might be the best to answer this, but others as well. What type of language do you see or do you suggest putting into wellness policies regarding school gardens?
Certainly happy to answer this. So in the brief that I mentioned, we do give sample language, and I'm happy to maybe put that in the chat to everybody or email it out after the webinar. But it is, you can be, sometimes we see very specific language in terms of, the school garden will be incorporated into the daily lives and activities of the school to promote nutrition, physical activities. Oftentimes there are, the school garden is connected with the nutrition policy part of the wellness policy. Wellness policies have many different components in terms of, there's a physical movement, physical activity piece, and then a nutrition piece, and then, a mental health piece as well. And so oftentimes school gardens kind of get into the section with the nutrition education, but I think it really can be connected to all different types of wellness. And so we see some general language, but also there can be more in-depth, broad language that talks about the school garden. I'd be happy, like I said, our brief mentions, gives sample language that folks have used in the past, kind of more in-depth ones, and then just kind of maybe one sentence that says, the school should provide nutrition education and engage in nutrition that, is engaging in nutrition that promotes, includes, enjoying school gardens and other things like that. So there's a couple of different sample things. I'd be happy to send it out.
Great, thank you. So for all of you that do cooking inside, what are some suggestions that you'd give for a school that does not have a kitchen? This particular question was asked from someone who's in Flint, Michigan, where they're still working on, in some cases, making sure that water is safe to drink again. So what are some suggestions you have for schools that might be working with those kind of limitations or, no kitchen, water, trying to make it, so when you have those limitations, making it easy as possible for teachers to incorporate cooking into their lessons on their own? Any suggestions for that?
This is Erin.
Go for it, Erin.
Thanks. We go into the classrooms, and most of our schools do not have cooking carts, and we're not allowed to use the kitchens in the schools, and so we're working right within the classroom. So as Christine mentioned, we bring everything in big Tupperware bins and transport it from school to school. But in terms of working within those constraints, I would just suggest starting really small. So identify some raw food recipes that maybe only involve 5 ingredients that that students can prepare. And then if your classrooms have a sink in them, that's where we do the majority of our dishwashing for these cooking lessons and for the cleanup. If you don't have that, you can always use a 3-bin system. So we use this at our garden-based summer camps, where we'll set up a bin of rinse water, soapy water, and then bleach, and actually teach our campers to wash dishes. So if the sink piece was a constraint, you could always set up that system and bring in jugs of water and have students wash right in the classroom. You'd obviously want to put down towels or something to catch the water. But setting up kind of a 3-bin dishwashing system, if that's one of the issues, could help.
Great, thank you. What are all y'all's favorite resources for curriculum? What do you use?
Yeah, totally. I'll take a stab at this. So in addition to my work with the Burlington School Food Project, I also work for KidsGardening, which is a national nonprofit that supports youth garden initiatives across the country. And we actually have a number of published curriculums, as well as a plethora of free online resources that can be accessed on our website, kidsgardening.org. Of our curriculum, there are a handful that are really, really great, particularly for like winter programming. So we have a whole series called Grow Lab, which is 2 books, and it's everything on kind of like activities you can do with the Grow Lab, but then also kind of guides to how to use a Grow Lab or how to think about growing things indoors. We also have a book called Botany on Your Plate, Investigating the Plants We Eat. And it's one of my favorite things is to think about what are we eating when we eat a piece of food? Are we eating the seeds? Are we eating the stem? Are we eating the roots? And it's a really comprehensive curriculum that kind of like takes you through that whole investigation. But we also have a number of resources that are aimed on, working outside in the garden. So if you check out our website, like they're all listed there. And again, those are both like in print or curriculums, but then also tons of free online resources.
And I'll add to that. And second, the kids gardening resources are all excellent. In addition to those, we also use the Growing Classroom book from Life Lab, which has a ton of gardening and food systems activities. And then we also use the Center for Eco-Literacy out of California, has some great food-based activities, as well as the Nourish curriculum guides.
And Life Lab's the Growing Classroom. Life Lab has also done a curriculum that's aimed at younger students at like early education. So kids who are 2 to 5, called Sowing the Seeds of Wonder. And KidsGardening is actually the publisher of both of those resources. So you can find links to them through our website or via Life Lab's website.
And finally, I'll add that Whole Kids Foundation has school garden curriculum that was developed with the American Heart Association that's free and downloadable on our website as well. Y'all listed such great resources. Thank you. Why don't we close out with a big question? Any of you all can answer, but how are you addressing climate change? Either teaching aquaponics that are run via solar or wind. Are you all currently incorporating any of those into your programming?
I can with the Burlington. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
You can go.
Okay, sure. So with the Burlington School Food Project, we don't specifically address climate change all that much, but we definitely talk a lot about food systems and being an informed consumer, and the idea of kids taking agency and thinking critically about what it is to purchase food that comes from very far away, and all of the resources that go into transporting that food versus buying food that's local, and then even thinking about kind of the organic versus non-organic dynamic, and thinking about how like local doesn't necessarily mean organic, and thinking about what are the things that matter to you as an individual and as someone who's eating the food, and thinking about if you want to take a stand on any of the issues kind of attendant to those labels that might contribute to climate change. So we aren't like tackling it directly, but I think there are indirect ways that we are talking about many of those issues.
I'll add on to that. With Gallatin Valley Farm to School, we address climate change similarly through our sustainable food education. So we do, probably the most direct link is we have a greenhouse bus called the Boson Ozone Bus that we drive around and bring to all of the schools and teach kids about healthy eating and plant science. And when we bring kids onto the bus, that's a perfect opportunity to talk about the greenhouse effect and relate what's happening in the greenhouse to what's happening to our atmosphere and with climate change. So we definitely talk about it there. And then we also incorporate, I think, generally just, promoting practices that will help mitigate climate change. So talking a lot about and promoting our producers in the area who are focusing on more environmentally and regenerative practices, talking in our garden lessons about plant science and the amazing, incredible system of plants pulling carbon dioxide out of the air and storing it as carbon in the soil. So and then again through the idea of food choices and looking at food miles and growing practices, how those decisions we make about food can have an impact on our broader community and on the environment as well. But I think there are tons more opportunities to add on to that. It's just challenging. We mostly work at an elementary level, so we're just kind of starting to bring that up in our programs.
Great, thank you. I know that was a big question to end with, but I really appreciate Christine, Erin, and Stefanie, your expertise and your sharing with us today. Thank you all for joining us. Again, you will be getting a copy of the recording in your email tomorrow, and check out our other webinars throughout the rest of the year. Thank you all. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.